If I've learned anything over 25 years of business, it's that finance leaders don't fail because they don't know the numbers. They fail because they're not in the conversation when the decision is made about those numbers. This is why we've created the CFO Review. I'm Paul Lynch, the CEO of Centage. And every week in each episode, I'm going to sit down with CFOs and finance leaders and unpack how they got to that seat, the decisions that shaped them, and how they're turning finance into being a real strategic partner. Great finance isn't about reporting the past. It's about shaping what comes next. So let's get into it. Hey everyone, and welcome to the CFO Review. I'm delighted today to have Karl Pichler with me. Karl, apart from being a personal friend, is probably San Antonio's most esteemed CFO when it comes to strategic direction. Currently the EVP of Sourceability and CFO, a business here in town that does distribution for semiconductors. Karl has a story past, which he's going to get into with us today. Karl, thanks a million for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, I know it's your first time here, so to give you the lay of the land, what we want to do here is we want to show finance professionals that are looking to jump that Rubicon between tactical and strategic finance, to get out of the management layer and into the C-level and really help drive strategy and results within the business that they're in. We found that final jump has always been the most difficult one for finance people to make.
Yeah.
And the whole purpose of this podcast is to act as a guidelight, an icon in terms of how you did it. So I'd ask you to, for one, talk about your past in terms of how you got yourself positioned to make that jump. Mm-hmm. And then we can look at, the decisions that you need to make, the risks and everything else. We'll have a look at what finance looks like today, where you think it could go in the future. And finally, we'll finish the show off with some fast rounds in terms of good advice you got, stuff that guided you along the path, and any mentors that you'd like to call out, and stuff like that. So
awesome.
Without further ado, I'll hand across to you.
Thank you.
Karl Pichler, this is your life.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so I was born and raised in Switzerland. I grew up with 3 siblings that are much older than me. My dad was an engineer, 2 brothers that were both engineers, and a sister who was an accountant. They're all retired by now. I had many interests that drove me towards the university years, mostly technology, but I found myself being a really untalented coder. So computer science, even though it was probably an upcoming career, way more so than I would have thought at that time, I kind of stayed away from. And my siblings and my dad, who were all in business roles after being engineers for 10 years or so, they just said, you're going to do eventually business anyways, so you may as well go study business. And that sounded very convincing. So I enrolled in the business school at a local university in Switzerland, and I just fell in love with finance. I had amazing teachers. I had 2 professors, one for capital markets, one for corporate finance, that had their education in the US, became tenured professors in the US, and then came back to Switzerland. They were both Swiss. And that had a couple of implications for me. One, they were excellent teachers and became mentors, etc. They were also, unbeknownst to me, laying the foundation for me to be competitive in the US market. Obviously, I grew up in Switzerland, but I had the general American MBA finance education with the same textbooks that everybody else uses in top universities here, which, later became obviously a relevant factor. So I fell in love with that. It was something that was a little bit more analytical than general business administration. And so it was something I was talented in and interested in and good at. And so it was kind of that intersection of stuff I'm passionate about and good at that, laid the foundation for a job, really. I then became a research assistant and a PhD candidate. So I pursued a PhD program in Switzerland, which is a little bit different than here. In the sense that you're mostly working at the university, for the university, as a teaching assistant, research assistant. You do some academic research work. You publish one paper at the very least, and in my specific case, we also wrote a German textbook. And
Really?
the reason why that is important is thinking back about roles that really have benefited me way more beyond what I thought at the time. Is that writing? I think I'm a good writer today. And I think it goes back all the way to that time. If you write at the academic level, if you want to get something published, or if you want to write a textbook, the necessity to be clear and concise and convincing is just super, super important.
Did you ever consider a career in academics as opposed to moving across?
No, I actually did not like the whole academic part of it. I liked, I'm a, Clifton StrengthsFinder people, they know what I'm talking about. I'm a learner, number one. I love to learn. I pursued a PhD program because of my joy for finance and learning. I never was really interested in academic research that much. And I dropped out of the program. Quite conveniently, one of the program aspects in Switzerland was because of those relationships of my professor in this case, the University of Rochester in upstate New York, we were able to go there as exchange students and just go study for 1 semester or 2 semesters. I ended up going for 1 semester. That was in the just around 99, 2000. And we were able to just take classes there. I took 2 PhD classes and 2 MBA classes, all in finance, obviously. And again, coincidentally, without any planning, without any, foresight or anything like that, I landed a job there. And I was hired by a consulting guy who started a consulting firm in the 80s called Stern Stewart. And the founding partner, Joel Stern, was a teacher or he was a part-time teacher, really, an adjunct professor in a couple of universities, including Rochester. And he taught a class on value-based management. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting. It's practical, it's applied, but it's stuff that I already know. And it was really, when I looked at the curriculum, I took the class because he was kind of a well-known person in the small niche community. And I thought I will do really well because all the content was already, stuff I already learned a million times. So I thought. And went into that class and had literally dozens of light bulb moments. It was the most enlightening class that really created a link between what it means from textbook finance to how you actually run a company for the creation of value. And Stern Stewart was a company that kind of popularized this whole idea of value-based management. They had a concept called EVA, which is part of it, but not really. It was more the whole cornerstone. And his class was called Theory and Policy of Modern Finance, but the motto of the company of Stern Stewart was to take the best of what corporate finance theory has to offer and apply it to the real world. And that to me was like, that sounded super convincing, awesome. That's exactly what I'm interested in. I'm not interested in academic research. I'm interested in really working on companies and applying that to the real world.
Can I bring you back to your decision around moving to Rochester? So making that jump, okay? I mean, it's calculated risk that drives people's success within their business career. That's a calculated risk.
Yeah.
I made that jump myself in the same years. I moved from Dublin to Cape Town, South Africa, and then Durban. Yeah. You moved from Switzerland in terms of the comfort life you had across to New York to do this. What drove what drove that risk? What drove that mentality to say, I'm going to Switzerland to upstate New York is pretty different.
Yes. So I need to correct that a little bit. So the exchange program visit to Rochester was a fairly simple decision. It was like, go study in Rochester for a semester or two. Easy, come back home, finish your dissertation. That was my plan. What happened is I got this job interview in New York City, with Stern Stewart, which I learned about during that class. And the offer that I got was very compelling. This was in 2000, before the crash.
Yeah.
Everything was super hot. And
2000 in New York, baby.
2000 in New York. And I came back to my boss, who is definitely one of my mentor, a little bit of a father figure in my life, and the guy I worked for, this corporate finance professor. He spent most of his career or his important years in the US. And I came back with an offer letter that was just too convincing. And it was actually a fairly low risk, easy decision. They paid for my apartment, they paid for reload, they paid for my visa. They said, come to New York and work for a firm that, looks pretty amazing. So it was actually not a very high risk move. It was it was done in a way that, it turned out all very different than what I thought it would be.
Sure. I think it always does.
But as it always does, but it sounded all very compelling. So I took that. Sure enough, they screwed up the visa process. And I went to the boot camp for 2 weeks, which was just kind of an introductory program. And then I had to go back and they sent me to Germany. So in Germany, we also had an office for that same firm. And they said, well, go to Germany and work there if you want, and just wait for your visa and then you come to New York. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. So I started in Germany. I moved to Munich, stayed there for a year. It actually took a year. And then after a year, I had to make a decision. You either stay in Germany, and you had clients there, and I developed relationships and friendships and all of that. If you don't want to come to New York, the opportunity is gone. So you have to come now or never. And that was in June of 2001.
Okay.
So I moved in June of 2001. Still things looked okay, but, on the declining path. And then, I moved to New York, and then, 9/11 happened 3 months later. And then in October, on Halloween Day, the company cut 30% of the workforce, the company I worked for. Yeah. So I moved to New York. That was a kind of a risky move at that point, with the benefit of hindsight, I guess. Massive cuts. And we were caught in this. We were basically selling a management framework in the world of WorldCom and Enron. And what happened really to the business is that due to Sarbanes-Oxley and all the other institutional and regulatory pressures, CFOs specifically, but management teams in general, did not really have the luxury or the desire or the courage to manage for anything but US GAAP. Yeah. It just became way too important. And compliance and accuracy and completeness and financial hygiene became so much more important than, managing for the real thing.
Well, I think what the generation of finance people and maybe business people today don't realize is they point at 2008 in terms of being the pinpoint, but they don't talk about the aftermath of 9/11. They don't talk about the Enron scandals, WorldCom.
Yeah, they're too young.
All of these were huge. Well, yes, but all of these were hugely defining in terms of how we structure finance today.
Yes,
and those safeguards that are around them. I mean, Sarbanes-Oxley was a groundbreaking legislative structure that they brought in, but incredible to implement.
Yes.
So, I can absolutely see some risk around that.
Yeah, exactly. So our business got decimated, and it was a challenging place to work at, but I absolutely loved my job. I ended up working for very large companies, very small companies. I built an implementation service, a highly productized implementation service. We called it, it was like a $50,000 3 months implementation package for small and medium-sized companies. And then one day, I was, I started to become fairly unhappy with the way that the company was run. I liked my job. I still continue to be a finance nerd. It was a great, very subject matter expertise related job. We will get to a couple of, the leadership changes issues here in a minute, but it was a finance nerd job. It was a consulting, corporate finance.
Tactical finance.
Yeah, very, very deep. And strategic finance too. It was all about how do you set up companies for systematic value creation. Okay. That was basically it, right? And so I started interviewing, and I ended up interviewing with Lehman Brothers, who later went out of business for our audience here
in 2008.
Exactly. And I did get a job. I did get a job offer as an investment banking associate. And when I joined Stern Stewart, I was hired as an associate. I was considered a post-MBA graduate because of my PhD, blah, blah, in Switzerland. And so, but what Lehman would not allow, even though I was a VP already at Stern Stewart, they basically said, look, you're not an investment banking VP or like a consulting guy, whatever. We want to hire you, but you have to start as an associate again. And I kind of, maybe out of pride, maybe out of I don't know, monetary considerations. I don't know exactly anymore, but I said no to that job.
Thankfully.
And sure enough, that company obviously went out of business quite dramatically a couple of years later. But even more importantly, about 2 months later, we got a call from Rackspace, and specifically from Graham Weston, who's one of the founding members of the team. And he read every business book that has ever been written in the universe. And he felt that EVA, or what Stern Stewart was selling, was an important cornerstone of Rackspace as they built the company. Most notably for the fact that Rackspace was heavily deploying capital. It was a capital-intensive business because we ran data centers and then infrastructure in the data centers. We owned all of that equipment. And the way that capital got deployed in Rackspace, it was really a customer choice, not a company choice.
Can I ask you, like, what's the year? And can you give us 2004? Can you give us a quick snapshot in terms of what Rackspace looks like then?
Yes, $80 million in revenue, 400 people.
Okay.
And so I got introduced to the company. We had, at that time, we ran some seminars across the country. Stern Stewart did, the company I worked for. Basically, one-day seminars on value-based management. And Rackspace basically said, okay, we want to have a dedicated seminar for us. Just we meet somewhere. I think we met in Atlanta or something. And you just come down. I bring a bunch of people. That's Graham talking. A dozen people or so. You bring your people, and then we just meet and we talk. And so we spent a day together, and it was mind-blowing. Just obviously mind-blowing in the sense that, not obviously, but it was just I have mostly dealt with corporate executives, and I've mostly dealt with very, corporate controllers, public company CFOs, maybe VP finance type of people. And this was a very different group of people. This was a group of entrepreneurs. They were mostly Texans. They were, brash, talking loud, but incredibly smart, very kind, and just ambitious beyond anything I've ever seen. And that was just a group of. I have never been around entrepreneurs. Never in my life. Even though Switzerland is somewhat of an entrepreneurial country in certain ways, I've never been around the entrepreneurial mindset.
Okay.
And all my family members were employed. All my belief was that I'm just going to be an employee. I never thought about being an entrepreneur. And I just met this group of people that was completely different and also very kind. And so, we had a very good time together, and we talked about stuff. They were incredibly smart. They were like sucking everything out of us that they could learn. It was just very engaging conversation. We ended up in the same hotel, coincidentally. So the conversation went into the bar after dinner. I think I missed my flight, or they missed their flight. And so we ended up talking the whole time. And it was just great. And then I saw the numbers. And when I saw the numbers, I went to my boss, who was the other guy of Stern Stewart, Bennett Stewart, and who was my boss at the time. And I said, this is the most amazing company I've ever seen. And we started talking about the numbers, and he's like, yeah, this is the most amazing company we have ever seen. And maybe not size-wise, but they had, this is getting finance nerdy in a way, but, the combination.
You're among friends, Karl.
The combination of growth, return on capital, the way that they reinvested into growth, the way that they thought about unit economics and growth, all the basic elements that we were preaching and thinking about. And I believe we had a little bit of an advantage in our ability to articulate why they were so great. They knew they were great, but maybe what got me hired eventually was my ability to articulate it better, or more clearly, or more convincingly, or maybe in more detail. I don't know. But they knew it all. So I did not bring anything to this company that they didn't already have. They had all the magic sauce about high value product, aggressive growth ambition, good unit economics, high degree of discipline, and then just go after it as long as you have the opportunity in a very ambitious, aggressive way. Anyway, so I did the consulting project. We kind of fell in love, I guess, mutually. And at some point the conversation started about joining them. And we talk a lot about leadership here. And again, I'm the finance nerd, right? I have never thought about assuming a leadership role. I have never thought about becoming, maybe I dreamt about being a CFO one day, but it was not really on my radar in terms of, a specific ambition or a career goal or anything like that. And so, I went through the interview process. Obviously, they knew me as a consultant. I knew them. It was mutually, we were mutually attracted to each other. But then Lanham, who was the president at the time, he said, well, you have to do an interview with Gallup. Gallup is that provider that we use to do a lot of different things, but they provide an interview service, and they basically test you for your leadership qualities. And I'm like, okay. And so I did that interview without any sort of preparation. Like many things, I was winging it, which we can talk about later about certain advices I got over my career. But for important meetings, you should be abundantly prepared.
I agree.
That is...
I'm not always abundantly prepared, but I do agree.
Yes. For important meetings, you cannot be over-prepared. And so I was not prepared at all. The first question that I think to remember was, and this was in 2004, so this is quite a long time ago. I think the first question they asked me is, how do you build constituencies? And I kid you not, I had to look up the word constituency because it was just not in my vocabulary. I was in the US at that time for 3 years. I was very okay in the English professional language of finance. But I did not know what to do with this. So needless to say, the interview did not go well. Lanham calls me a week later and he's like, dude, we have a problem. You totally bombed the interview. And I'm like, good or bad? And he's like, bad. They told us not to hire you. They said, you cannot hire this guy. He has zero leadership qualities. And I'm like, okay, what do we do now? And he's like, well, you have to have more interviews. So I had more interviews with other people at Rackspace, with the sales leader, with other people. And eventually they kind of decided to hire me. And, that was obviously an eye-opener because I did, through this interview, through this little experience, but then also through the fact that I joined a company that took leadership and leadership quality and managerial quality and people orientation very, very seriously, I just realized that, my subject matter expertise matters a little bit, but this is a completely different job. Different job. I was hired as VP of Finance. We had a VP of Accounting. We didn't have a CFO at that time. And my job was basically to really formally implement and architect our value-based management framework. And how do we think about systematic value creation? What are the metrics we're going to use? And then, evangelize it throughout the organization, do a lot of training, structure the board communication, but everything around it.
So here's the question.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know the group of entrepreneurs you're talking about, obviously. Yeah. I know Lanham, Lou, Graham.
Yeah.
Incredible entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Incredible drive. And I think you hit the nail on the head by saying super bright.
Yeah.
Some of the brightest people you'll ever meet.
Yeah.
However, that entrepreneurial mindset can be wild. It can bring them in different directions, and those directions aren't always for the betterment of the business. They act on impulse. I'm an entrepreneur myself, as you know. Do you feel that the value management framework that you were introducing was to almost not put guardrails, because you can't put guardrails around business teams like that, but to drive that kind of mechanism by which the business could grow on a directional basis, strategically, as opposed to wildly going in every different direction? Because I've had conversations with Lou around opportunities that they turned down in Rackspace, and it's made my hair stand on end in terms of the financial position of the business at that point and what they turned down.
Yeah, I think very much so. I think it was a maybe that's too big of a word, but it was an architectural piece. It was guardrails, call it guardrails or frameworks or whatnot. I think when I think back about these years, and everybody has different narratives around the years there, but I think the whole idea about customer orientation and net promoter score, the whole idea around employee engagement and Q12 and Strength Finder And then the whole idea about a systematic approach to financial management with EVA and, associated value-based management frameworks were really the cornerstones of how we built the business. And those frameworks, they were applied in more or less explicit ways along the way. At some point we were talking about these things very explicitly. At some points we were talking about it more in the background. But I think they were guardrails. They were really guardrails that allowed us to scale the business.
Yeah.
And to make repeated decisions in a structured way. So, the simplified way I talk about this is like, it helped us to ensure that our unit economics are so well understood and so well controlled and managed that we can simply maximize growth. And a lot of companies, when they maximize growth, they get into this constant. Software companies are different because their marginal costs are zero, basically. So every unit of growth is always positive. But we were different. We were a service company with a heavy infrastructure component. So we had a lot of variable costs. Our margins did not. We didn't have operating leverage, which a lot of people didn't understand why we didn't grow our margins so much when our revenue grew. But we deployed. Famously, the words were always just barely in time. We deployed all resources just barely in time, whether it was data center space or people that supported our customers or back office infrastructure that supported the business. Everything was hired just barely in time, and maybe a little bit too late, ideally, right? Mm-hmm. And but I think it was a set of guiding principles that allowed us to repeatedly make conscious decisions in a structured way, removing the need for constantly relitigating and renegotiating decisions, and just get on a train of like just sell and serve more customers, and just go absolutely towards value maximization.
I love the simplicity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is needed. Again, software businesses are very different, but you need to be able to. There was obviously lots of people that were working in the machinery of all of this to make it look simple, right? So we had pricing teams, we had whole teams that were finance, people that worked for me, operational finance people that were, farmed out into the business to support all of the individual decision making to make sure it's all consistent at the end, right? So it's not like it wasn't just like it wasn't automagic. It was like it had to be worked on every day. But basically that would happen. Anyways, so I joined that company. That was my first job, VP of Finance, implementing that framework. Then we went public. That was a whole other topic that we can elaborate on in great detail or not. But we went public. We ended up being the last IPO before the financial crisis. We ended up going public in 8808.
Wow.
And I was not the CFO at the time. This was a little dagger in my heart because I was not at the New York Stock Exchange when we rang the bell. But I was basically the project lead on the IPO process. So I wrote the S1. I did all the analyst teach-ins. We did obviously the roadshow presentation is all of it is a team effort. Everything is a team effort, no matter what. But I was heavily involved in that process to get the company to.
And can you give us an idea of the valuation of IPO?
Gosh, $1 billion maybe.
Okay.
$1.5 billion or $1.3 billion. I don't actually remember that much.
Between $1 billion and $1.3 billion revenue at that point.
400 maybe.
400 million.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not like when you look at the technology multiples now in terms of IPO.
Oh yeah.
Very reasonable.
But again, we had a very different business, right? Because we had this heavy infrastructure element. We were also like the analyst teach-ins I mentioned, right? We had a lot of challenges when we went public for very many different reasons. But
we did about a month after that.
Yeah. So we were very poorly understood because we were a recurring revenue business like the software businesses. And we had margins not like service businesses because we had better margins than service business. Service businesses are very low margin businesses. So we were better than that. But then we also had the very heavy infrastructure component. So we looked like a data center company, but we were not really a colocation company. Colocation was something in the 90s and 2000s that doesn't really exist that much anymore these days, but it was basically, data center as a service, and you open up the data centers to your customers and you let them in, and they have a cage, and then they go in, deploy their own servers and do that stuff. We did never do that. We never were a colocation business. We always managed everything within the data centers. The customers didn't even know where they were. And what we did eventually at the end of the day, when infrastructure was provisioned, we provided credentials, and then the customers were doing everything remotely. And so, again, with the benefit of hindsight, we now call ourselves the slow cloud, because we did basically cloud computing before the cloud existed, but just in a service component, and with very flexible contracting and with a very high degree of customer orientation. But ultimately, that all turned that tech-enabled service company eventually became a technology solution, which is what we know today as cloud computing, where everything just got automated, turned into technology and became big, better, cheaper, and faster. Anyhow, so I worked on the IPO. That was obviously a great experience. My wife was pregnant with our first daughter during that same time, and I always joke that an IPO takes about 9 months, a pregnancy takes about 9 months. In my case, they were coinciding. So I turned to become, my daughter was born in June of that year, and we went public in August, 2 months later or so. It was obviously an experience, great. The IPO was a very, in a way now, with the benefit of hindsight, again, a very bad experience. We sold shares at $12.50. We did the Dutch auction against everybody's advice, which is a technicality. We don't really have to go into details, but needless to say, we sold our shares to the investing public at $12.50. We started trading at $10, so we are immediately, our initial investors lost 20%, which is a bad debut.
Okay.
Then we traded down all the way to $4 within 6 months. And I was at that point in charge for investor relations, which was probably the worst job in my entire life. And I don't use that word lightly, but I hated it. I hated it for the obvious reasons. We were a new stock that got totally hammered in the worst global financial crisis you can imagine. Nobody wanted to talk to us. People didn't know if the financial system is going to survive. It was just bad. And then investor relations has this unique challenge to it that if you want to talk about it in extremes, you have the one school of thought that investor relations should convince investors or motivate investors to invest. And then there's the other school of thought that says, well, not really. You should never really convince or motivate or coerce or, suggest or anything like that. You should just inform, right? And so there's this balance. Especially if you're heavily under pressure as a new stock market debut, you wanna actually induce investors to become investors,
sure,
right? But you also don't really, that's a very fine line then, where you maybe start making promises, or when you start make suggestions about how the business will perform in the future, and where you may, when you get on this very difficult path of basically convincing people about the future prospects, maybe more so than you should. And that's a very fine line to take. Very difficult situation, and
I think there are different classes of thought.
Yeah,
I mean, the induction, really, the inducement should be at the roadshow level. That's exactly what that's about. Like, once you have an established investment core, I mean, one has different responsibilities around investor relations, but I can understand where there's a dichotomy of thought here in terms of inducing additional investors to follow.
Yes. And also, we did have a core. Obviously, we established a core at the IPO, but then because of the market conditions that prevailed over that first year of being public, it was just very difficult to. And, the reality is also that there's a lot of core that's being reshuffled on day one. Most of the people that get IPO allocations flip immediately. I mean, that's a well-documented empirical fact. So much for the core that's being built in the roadshow. But you do establish all the relationships to the investment community happen. That establishment happens during the roadshow, right? You meet all the analysts, you meet all the key investors, you meet all the institutions, etc. Anyways, so I really, really thought about leaving the company, and not really leaving the company. It really pained me to think about leaving the company, but I was not in the right job. And I really did not like it. We were very much struggling with that dichotomy that you mentioned of how we want to position the company and how much we want to press the conviction buttons and how much we want to sell versus just inform. We had a lot of disagreements internally on how to do that. I was conflicted in my head on how to do that. I was just in the wrong role, in the wrong spot. And it was very, very difficult. And so what happened was we had a UK business that at that time was about 80 million pounds in turnover. It was like a Rackspace mini-me. The UK was interesting because the US was so self-absorbed just because of so many things going on. And I mean that in a good way, that the UK was running completely on its own. And it was like a small version of the company. It was basically at that time about the size that Rackspace was when I joined in San Antonio. And it was getting bigger. It had its own data center, its own office. It had its basically own market authority. Like, basically they could do everything outside of the US. It was kind of their remit, right? As always. And so what we did over that first couple of years when I was at Rackspace, I sent one of my direct reports to the UK because the company got, or the UK, the non-US business, as we called it, got big enough for it to have a dedicated finance leader there.
Okay.
That was Brian Thompson, and I sent Brian Thompson over there to the UK, and he became, a very well-respected leader over there. And then we had some MD, managing director issues, and the managing director left, and Brian became the managing director. And over there, the positions are called a little bit differently. He was FD first, finance director, which is kind of the CFO equivalent or the local CFO equivalent. And then he became MD, and he calls Lanham, unbeknownst to me, and he's like, the only person I want to be my FD is Karl.
Okay.
And that was very interesting because he worked for me, and then he became MD, and then he basically said he wants me to be his FD. And a lot of people, I mean, I didn't share this with a lot of people back then, but the friendly advice or the kind of the original kind of immediate response from some people was like, why would you go work for a guy that once worked for you? And I found that very non-convincing an argument, and because of the situation I found myself in, being like, I don't really want to do the job here anymore that I had, and I was thinking about leaving the company, I felt very compelled to take that opportunity, and I had no problem working for Brian, just switching roles in that way, and now suddenly working for him, and I always felt that, he has his role and I have my role, and we're partners in this, and it doesn't really matter too much who reports to whom. And I told my wife that, if we don't go to the UK, I'm probably going to leave the company, and I don't want to leave the company. I think this is a very unique place. So I went to the UK and was there for 3 years, and that was really the first time that so the leadership component started to happen immediately, or started to matter immediately. But this was also the first time that I started to be in charge for accounting and statutory reporting in the UK, and tax compliance and payroll, and all the things, all those fun things that I never had to deal with before, and operational accounting like payables and receivables and billing, and things like I had the luxury of not even to care about in the past. And I think that's important as we think about, how do you position yourself to become a CFO, I'm not an accountant by training. I don't have a CPA. I always joke, I don't really know what they do when they say they close the books. I really don't know what they do. But you have to really have not only a good understanding, obviously, of what accounting does and how it works and what the rules are, but you also have to have an appreciation. And I think a lot of finance people are a little bit condescending towards the accountant. And the accountants usually are a little bit annoyed by the finance people, and there's a big divide between the two. And if you cannot bridge that divide, you will never be a good CFO. Because if you cannot lead accounting effectively with the necessary appreciation for what they do, and also the understanding that your financial hygiene is gonna, or the lack of financial hygiene is gonna cost your job as the CFO, even if you're not an accountant, that's really important.
It's really well said. I mean, let me. This is to paraphrase Elon. This is technology leaders who can't code. These are cavalry captains who can't ride horses. At the very basis of finance and accounting, accuracy is key. That has to be an absolute given. So if you're going to take a leading financial role, a leading role in finance, a leading role in tech, a leading role in sales, you must have the historical muscle strength in terms of how to do that. And I couldn't agree more with you. And I see that conflict.
Yeah.
And I've seen it over and over and over again.
Over and over.
Where there is a distinct lack of appreciation in terms of what the technical function within finance is and what it delivers. I've often compared it to the office manager who every morning comes to the office 45 minutes before everyone. Every morning makes coffee. Every morning people come in and drink that coffee. But the one morning the coffee's not made, everyone goes batshit.
Yeah.
So I mean that's where I see it. And before we move on, I like it's another. When you talk, you talk very lightly in terms of moving to the UK to work with Thomson. It shows an enormous lack of hubris, Karl. Like you pass beyond that. I know so many people within that position that would have flatly refused to do that and would have seen it a backward directional step within their career. Mm-hmm. Yet you took it and grasped it and moved forward with it, which I think is a lesson that a lot of people could learn in terms of how their careers evolved. I've worked for people that worked for me, and I've had people that worked that I worked for work for me. And it's a common sense approach to business management, where it's the best mechanism by which you can get to the end outcome that you desire. So yeah, we're back to Rackspace and the finance function and managing ADP and all those lovely things.
Yes. So anyways, accounting, that was my first time that I had responsibility for that, plus some other corporate services like real estate and things like that. But also because of the smaller nature of the business, and because Brian and I were such partners, it was also directly or somewhat indirectly a P&L ownership.
Yeah.
And that's another thing, right? Which is that you have to have commercial responsibility for a P&L in order to become an effective CFO eventually. And you can always hide behind the CEO a little bit. But if you're like in this situation, there were really no hiding.
No.
We were the UK business and we got a lot of, Lanham was always on our butts all the time about, this is the margin we need to deliver and we needed to deliver it. And this is the growth we need to deliver, etc. Blah, blah, blah. So that was really very important foundations for becoming even, a relevant candidate, so to speak. So P&L ownership, full exposure to the whole CFO stack, if you want, including the stuff across the bridge, like accounting for non-accountants, or if you're a controller and you want to become a CFO, you better know your finance stuff, right? Same thing, right? Yeah. So it happens both ways. So our growth rates declined during that period, like everybody, but we were still growing at the minimum, I think, was a 20% annual growth rate through the global financial recession. And we had very successful years. Obviously, we did a lot of things during those years that were, tasks of the day, like, payment plans for our customers and being more lenient with payments and blah, 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 blah. But, we managed through it fairly well. And we were very successful during those couple of years, right? And so what happened then after that, and this now gets me to kind of the CFO job, the CFO that we had at the time is a gentleman we hired specifically to go public, Bruce Kanuheisen. He was a very seasoned executive. He was a telco CFO for many, many years. We hired him just before the IPO. He was the man with the gray hair, so to speak. Now we all have gray hair.
Indeed.
But back then we didn't. And we were not considered to be taken seriously. With, a little bit like the entrepreneur craziness that you mentioned before, right? Graham and Lanham and Lou are very, very convincing people. But, when you meet them for the very first moment, they come across as a little, Texan.
No.
And so, some people thought, obviously, once you start talking to them, you very quickly realize that there's a lot of depth there. But the people thought that we needed somebody like that. Anyways, he joined us. And after 3 years, he basically quit or he left. And it was, I think, a little bit more abrupt than the company wanted. And there was a need for an interim CFO, and I became interim CFO. And at that point, my plan, my personal plan, my professional plan was to go to Switzerland as a next step. So after London, my plan was to set up the Swiss principal structure, which was basically a global tax optimization plan for Rackspace with a Swiss principal entity. And because I'm Swiss, it only made sense. I was already in the UK. I was already the CFO of the non-US business. It made sense for me to do. And my plan was to go home. That's where my kids are going to get raised, and I'm going to be Swiss, and my wife has to learn German, and we're going to live in Switzerland for the rest of our days. That was the plan. And then Bruce left. I became interim CFO, and we had lots of leadership issues in the US. We had lots of team issues. The company was doing just fine.
Can I interject? Date and revenue?
2011, $1 billion.
Okay.
And so, obviously I took the interim opportunity very happily. That was like, oh my God, this is awesome, right? But I also, and I don't say that in a overly humble way, I also had no expectation that I would be a candidate for the role. And it was made clear to me that you are interim and we're going to hire a top shot CFO.
Okay.
Because we're now $1 billion company, our valuation is back up, we're a cloud company, we're gonna get a rock star, okay? And I'm like, sure, because I'm gonna go to Switzerland anyways, right? And so whether it's emotional hedging and not even thinking about it because I don't get it anyways, I don't know anymore what it was, but I seriously did not consider that to be my future. But the interim opportunity was great. Right, it looks great on the resume, awesome stepping stone, super great, right? So I did this interim thing, and the first couple of months were very difficult. We had to fire my pendant in the US, which was not easy, but then after a couple of months, things started to go really well. I was invited to present at the Goldman Sachs Telco conference. And one of the board members was in the audience, and that went very well, according to him. And those are like humbling moments where
Indeed.
I once I start talking and get into the groove, it's okay, but I'm very nervous, and being in an event like that was a very challenging experience, but it went well anyways. So I did okay, I guess. And at the same time we were hiring. I was also in the hiring committee. We were interviewing people, and I say that San Antonio helped me because it was very difficult for anyone to attract high talent to San Antonio, as it is still the case today. And we just could not find anyone. And we just could not find a CFO that has done it all, that wants to do it again, that wants to move their family to San Antonio, uproot them from California or New York or whatnot to come to San Antonio in Texas. And so, my competition, even though I didn't see it as such at that point, was really not very strong. And so, probably internally in my mind, I started to become like, well, I probably am a competitor at this point. I did well in the role. There was not really any strong other candidates. We started slowly talking about it. I had conversations with Lou that I remember about this. It was unclear to me whether this is something for me to take or something for me to be given. there's in the European culture is very much, you don't ask for these jobs. They're being given to you. And in the US, if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it.
Yes.
I mean, as a matter of fact, if you don't ask for it, the interpretation is that you don't really want it or you're not ready. And so that was a long little mind twist, obviously. But in the end of the day, we were, getting to that point where it's like, okay, I think we're going to get there, but you need help because we are a public company and you're not an accountant, you're a finance nerd, blah, blah, blah. And so we want you to hire a chief accounting officer. I'm like, yes, please. And so, that's a godsend. And so we hired Joe Saporito, who was a former Arthur Andersen partner. He had, our audit firm partner that audited us at the time was a junior when he was a partner at Arthur Andersen.
Okay.
And so he knew everyone. He was a chief accountant for all intents and purposes. He was my partner in crime. He took care of all the accounting and the compliance and the Sarbanes-Oxley. And I could not have done it without him and the team that he built. And anyway, without the team that we collectively built. And obviously has contributed massive support and contributed to what we built together. So that was imposed on me, happily taken. And they basically said, okay, you got to hire a CIO and then it's your job. And Lana was like, any specific requests? And I'm like, well, I would like to be appointed before I'm 40. So I can say I was a public company, $1 billion CFO before the age of 40. And they promoted me 4 days before my birthday because of that, but only because I asked, it was funny. But so in November of 2011, I became appointed CFO. And so
Karl, in terms of that jump, okay, in terms of the appointment through into CFO, let's look at that for a second. You weren't seeking it. You accepted the interim role because there was a void or a vacancy inside of the business.
Yeah.
At the point where was there a hallelujah moment where you said to yourself, I can do this. I can do this better than other people that they're going to attract to San Antonio. And what did, if you can put yourself back in that mindset, what did that look like? I mean, was there imposter syndrome? Was there, with the lack of sort of accounting knowledge that you had? Talk to us about that and how you managed to bridge that.
Yeah, there was definitely, I mean, as I mentioned before, there was initially not the aspiration or the belief that I was ready. There was also, whether it was just, again, mental hedging. Maybe I just told myself I don't want it, so I'm not going to be disappointed if I don't get it. There was all of that happening. Then I was in the role and I saw the other candidates. And of course, if you're in a role and you see all the other candidates, you very quickly realize that everybody is just a person.
Yeah.
With their bags of experiences and expertises and quirks and pros and cons, and so am I. Right?
Yeah.
And we were a very obviously culture-intensive company. So I started to realize I have a big advantage just by the fact that I know everyone, that I've been in this company for so long. At that time, I was in the company for 6 years. I was in the UK for 3 years. I was in the US for 3 years. I did the IPO. I mean, I know everyone. And that in and of itself is valuable both for me in the job, but it's also valuable for the company. And then, I need to mention Brian at this point as well, because Brian and I had this conversation, and when it became somewhat of a topic of if I would be willing, able, to do this job, I was telling him that I'm hesitating or contemplating not taking it, and he's like, "Are you effing stupid?" And I mean, he said it in a very direct way, and that this is life-changing. And I think I had to hear that from somebody that was not directly involved in the process, because everybody that's involved in the process is a little bit hedging, right? Because they can't really offer the job because it's a complicated process to get appointed, which we can also talk about a little bit. But he put my head straight in the sense that you need to recognize that not taking this is 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 that's a very far-reaching decision, right?
Yeah.
So I told my wife we're going to go back to San Antonio, and her first response was like, "You can go alone."
Oh no.
She was like, "I don't want to move back to San Antonio."
I love your wife, dude. She's adorable, but I can imagine that she's focused.
She had no interest in coming back to San Antonio. And now, fast forward many years, they never ever want to leave. She doesn't want to leave.
Yeah.
She loves it. It's our home. We never want to leave our home, our house, San Antonio. I mean, it is like completely different. But at the time, because we were in London, and London is obviously an amazing place to live. We lived outside, kind of not in the city, kind of in Richmond, Twickenham area, which is a lovely place to live.
Those who watch Ted Lasso.
Yes, we were right there. We were on that green all the time. And you know, she had no interest in going back, but we then had a subsequent conversation, a more serious one. And I said, look, like, you know, a little bit paraphrasing Brian, it is like, we cannot have a fight over the most important career choice in my life. I mean, this is an opportunity that, you know, a guy out of Switzerland usually doesn't get. Like, I would have never had this opportunity in Switzerland. I think this is one of the reasons why I think the US is so much more attractive as a place for your professional growth, because I don't think I would have had the same opportunities back home. I think you never know. You cannot ever, you know, prove what did not happen. But I think this opportunity, I think, was unique, and so, you know, we had a more serious conversation. She was obviously immediately supportive, and we moved back, and we're still here.
Yes.
You know, 12 years later, or what is it now? We came back in 2012. Yes, I was appointed 2011. We can move back 2012. And then, you know, I was in the role for 6 years, and then eventually we sold to Apollo because being public was difficult at the end.
Taking advantage of that opportunity, you know, making that, like, first the jump, like Switzerland to the US back to Germany back to the US, taking a risk in terms of going out of a safe area, moving into a business that was Rackspace, and then ultimately, like, with a family making that jump. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I'm European, as we both know. I'm Irish, and I believe the opportunities afforded in the United States is what makes it great.
Yes.
You know, it's why people want to come here and cultivate and build careers, because you can, as a kid coming out of Switzerland, become a CFO of a public limited company before the age of 40. But I think that these things are never handed to you. You know, everything you spoke about has been business related and strategic, rather than, you know, it's been all about driving business and driving value, driving client success. And that's what made Rackspace such a brilliant entity. Like, I always refer back to the fractional, the fanatical support. That kind of narrative and messaging was crazy.
Genius
At the time, but genius.
Yeah.
I mean, it like with my hosting company, which I ran in Ireland, we looked to emulate it. I mean, we looked to Rackspace as that value creation engine, and tried to emulate it. Of course, we weren't as successful as Rackspace, but, you know, the model that it taught us gave us enough to be the largest in Ireland. So, okay, I think that gets us through to the leverage buyout from Apollo.
Yeah.
What then? So you've achieved this. You've become the CFO of a publicly limited company before the age of 40. You're now happily settled and married. You have this event, which, like, you know, the whatever got taken off the table is completely irrelevant. Like, but I mean, let's say you don't immediately need to show up the next Monday.
Yeah.
To you know, to make the mortgage or rent payments. But you've gone on and had a great career thereafter. What's that motivation? What's that motivation to stay in the game?
Well, I did not.
Okay.
I did not. I think I took a very untypical path, which, again, with, you know, we're talking about career planning and career advancement, etc. And I took the foot off the gas probably at my peak.
Okay.
Which is not usual.
I agree.
Okay. So there was a lot of things going on. The last couple of years at the Rack, before we went private were difficult. Because not like just business difficult, right? We had strategic challenges. We were kind of an Amazon
Amazon Web Services had come in.
Exactly. Yeah. We had lots of turnover in the board. We had lots of turnover in the management team. We had diverging opinions as to what we need to do. We had, periods where everybody was the CFO for like 6 months and everybody had an opinion as to how we should, borrow money to pay a dividend and serve our activist investors. And it was really painful. So that all led eventually to the realization and to the decision that the company really needs to be governed in a different model. And the public company governance model is good in many ways, and it has lots of trade-offs, right? As we all know. Being a public company has its pros and cons like everything else in life. But in that specific situation, the company could not survive in the public context. And so the decision to go private and to be sold to private equity was the right decision. To have a sole owner with full responsibility and authority and conviction and non-independence was super critical. So everybody agreed to that. But we were also, and I don't want to speak for others, even though I think we were all in the same boat, but we were all tired. We did not have the answer, because if we would have had the answer, we would have done it, right? We had our opinions as to what we should be doing, but we could not reach consensus. And so we all had to leave, right? And so I remember back then, there was like this phase about like, well, I want to find my next 10-year thing because I really felt like I want to, commit myself to the next thing on a long-term basis. And I was looking for that a little bit. I started to interview. I interviewed with a couple of local companies here. I was not excited at all. I also, as a public company CFO, I did 25 earnings calls in a row. And 6 years times 4 plus 1 stop year. And it is a very repetitive job. It was a great company and everything, but you can tell yourself all you want. You don't want to be on the treadmill. You are on the quarterly shot clock, treadmill, whatever you want to call it. It is the same over and over and over again. And I love variety. And I don't do well. Even when I think about my Rackspace years, I was head of finance for 2 years. Then I worked on the IPO for 1 year. Then I was in the UK for 3 years. Then I was CFO for 3 years, 3 good years. And then we had challenging years when we sold the company. So I had very different jobs. And that was also the reason why I was able to build towards the CFO role, which is the variety that I think you need. But it was also the thing that kept me there, because it provided a lot of variety. And the quarterly shot clock and the same arguments with the investors all the time. And you're going to get killed by Amazon. You're going to get killed by Amazon. What are you going to do against Amazon? And how are you going to compete against GCP and Azure and blah, blah, blah. And all the time. And so it just gets odd. And so, when I thought about like, do I really want to continue as a public company CFO, which was the natural next step, right? And then towards, you want to be a Fortune 500 CFO, and then you want to be a Fortune 100 CFO. And that's kind of what drives you, right? I was not sure that I really wanted that, right? And so, I started working with Lou and Ed, and,
Lou and Ed are Scaleworks.
Scaleworks,
a local venture equity fund here in town in San Antonio.
Exactly. And there was a little bit of an entrepreneurial itch that I believed I had. And again, I'm really not an entrepreneur, to be quite blunt about it, but I felt like I need to do something, start something from zero. And so we started that debt fund, which was really Lou's and Ed's idea. And I just kind of worked on that. And then I did something completely different. I went and became a teacher. And I was teaching at a local university here, and they approached me. I was always part-time teaching. I love it. It's one of my passion projects. But it's Trinity University here in town, and they had a very under-nurtured finance program at that time. And they felt they need somebody who is going to review their curriculum, redo the curriculum, and then, teach a lot. And I felt like, well, why not? That sounds like a great thing to do. And but for anyone who wants a little bit career advice, is that decision is hard to explain. If you want to get back into the job later, which I wanted to and did eventually, nobody believes that you want to work again if you became a professor at the height of your career.
No, I can understand that.
And you can tell them whatever you want. They're not going to believe you. I mean, if you tell them that you spent the last 3 years doing what, and you were like in that trajectory, and then you were like in your 40s, 50s, and you do that, that's kind of, nobody really understands that. And I don't want to really, you were asking about mistakes and stuff. I try not to have regrets, and I try to not talk about mistakes, because you never know. I mean, things could have gone differently in many ways. But from a career, wealth maximizing, career maximizing point of view, this was a killer mistake, right? This basically takes you out of the consideration set. I don't think, even if I would try very, very hard, which it's not my objective, but the path to a large public company CFO role is closed, just gone.
Interesting,
right? And that's just the consequences of those decisions. And from that point of view, it was a mistake, but it was also somewhat of a deliberate decision, and it was something that was right to do. And there were family considerations a little bit mixing into that as well. Not too many, but my family was always very supportive. But there were things that made it okay for me to not have a job that just is super all-consuming. Because it is. I mean, these jobs are, I don't want to, create an excessive kind of explanation or description about this, but they are stressful.
No,
extremely stressful.
Like, I can understand. They are. I mean, any public limited company, when you're doing earnings call on a quarterly basis, is incredibly stressful. Plus, are you going to be able to stay in San Antonio? I mean, you've made this decision in terms of where you want to locate your family. You now have 3 children. They're in education.
Yeah. And by the way, my wife did not want to relocate. That was another thing. Now, at that point, it's like, now I want to, because now if I want to continue as a CFO, I need to move again.
You're moving to New York
City. And at that point, even though she didn't want to come back originally, right? Now it's like, no, we're not going to move.
Yeah.
And so, that limits your consideration set.
Very much so.
Yeah.
So look, really, really interesting. I mean, I think you found a path back into business.
Yes.
You're currently EVP and CFO of Sourceability.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think a smaller entity, a couple of $100 million in revenue. Mm-hmm. So a smaller entity than a public limited company, and you're succeeding there. So, albeit that it may have closed tracks into additional sort of public limited CFO roles, you did find your path back into operational business.
Yeah.
Which is
I
great.
love. Which I love. Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered off the background. We've covered off the move from tactical to strategic finance, the path to CFO. What now? And you put yourself in a position that you're now sitting as a VP finance inside of a mid-sized business, maybe 25 to 100 million. What does the future of finance look like? What are you looking for now? I mean, the Rackspace story is a really interesting one, in that you disrupted a traditional space, which was co-location data center services, by bringing this service layer and wrap around that, and building out management structures to allow you to do that like in an effective manner. You're a VP finance now. We're in the age of AI. We're in the age of advanced technical solutions. What do you do now? How do you optimize that, and what's your path in your view?
Yeah. Well, so I think we can address this in many different ways, but I think as an effective finance leader, and let's leave accounting on the side, but we can talk about the future of the finance function maybe as well separately. But there's this couple of taglines I think that people always say. In finance, you need to be an enabler, not a blocker. Okay, what does that really mean, right? Or you need to be a driver of growth, not really a protector of margins or something like that, right? I think these are all very important kind of guiding little principles that people should take very seriously, because I do think that where things go wrong for finance professionals often is that they're not really thinking about the business holistically. And what I mean by that is, at the very basic, a company has to provide something of value to customers that they want to pay for, right? We'll call it product market fit or whatever, jargon you want to use for that. That's objective 1A. If you don't have that, you have nothing, right? Then quick follow objective 1B, or maybe a requirement rather than an objective, is you have to be able to make money along the way, because if you can't, you go out of business eventually. Okay, making money is a very simple thing to say that has a million nuances, and is very complicated very fast when you think about what that actually means, right? Making money on a profit basis, on a cash flow basis, on a return basis, making money today versus tomorrow. How does the business scale? What is, how do margins fit all into it? This gets very, very complicated very fast. So there in itself is a big engagement area for a good finance person in terms of being able, and this is part of what I did actually at the Rackspace, or what we did collectively as a team, is really to create the nuanced understanding of what it really means to create value and make money along the way, right? In a very, very deliberate, well understood way, and well controlled and managed way. And then number 3, once you have, I would call 1, product market fit, 2, unit economics. You have to understand that you can make money doing what you're doing. And then number 3, now you just have to make it as big and as long lasting as you can, right? That's it.
Yes.
Those are the 3 things you need to
do. That's simple.
Product market fit, make it profitable, and then scale it.
Yeah.
Right. And the scaling itself has a lot of implications, right? How do you build a business that is actually scalable, that allows itself to be scaled, that is managing the trade-offs between simplicity and complexity in a way that it makes it scalable. Another principle that we had Rackspace, not often mentioned, but one of the things that I think Graham always said, is that we have to avoid complexity as long as we can. And a lot of companies don't take that seriously enough and just become too complex too fast. They have too many products. They go into too many markets. The Canada problem. I don't know if you have ever heard of the Canada problem. I've read about it once. The Canada problem is the simple belief that US companies, they go to Canada or to the UK because they also speak English, right? Yeah. And it's kind of in a very adjacent market. Not understanding is overly simplified, but of course, there are cultural differences. There are time zone differences. There are institutional differences. There are different currencies, things like that, which sounds very adjacent. It's a completely different world, right? We benefit from the largest market. Walmart is the largest revenue company in the world, and they're entirely basically in the US, right? Yes. So we have this one massive benefit, which is like, you do not have to go abroad to build your own business. You can. It always provides a marginally positive incremental opportunity, but so does everything else. So the question about, which marginal opportunity do you go after and which one are you ignoring has to be a really deliberate decision. And that's a little bit like, how do you drive growth, right? It's not just like, well, I have to drive growth for the sake of growth. You have to deliberately, very thoughtfully scale the business so that the customer value still is preserved, or ideally gets better. You still are able to make money. So, objective 1A and 1B are still there, right? And you can manage the complexity. And that's not a trivial task at all. Where a good finance person can, have a lot of work to do in there.
I know. I mean, the adage that Einstein said was, anyone can make things complex.
Yes.
It takes genius to make it simple.
To make it simple, yes. Exactly.
Which I agree entirely. And so when you referenced earlier Lou, as in Lou Moorman, in an early iteration of one of the software companies in Scaleworks, we talked about global expansion. At least I talked about global expansion. And then he asked me if the North American market wasn't large enough for me.
Yeah.
Which is a very difficult position to argue when you're a business doing $3.5-4 million in revenue and looking to scale.
Yeah.
Really.
And going back to these guys, right? Lou and Graham and Lanham, they have this incredible ability to basically make you understand everything by asking one question.
Yes.
That very thing that he did, like I had a couple of those moments with Lou and also with Graham, where it's like you talk and talk and talk and talk, and then they make one sentence or one question, and immediately the conversation stops.
Exactly.
Because you find, if you just realize the whole world opens up to you that you just haven't internalized properly before, which makes them very, very powerful entrepreneurs in that sense.
So Karl, what's the takeaway? So in terms of like the model that you're talking about here it's simple to the point of possibly executable, which is wonderful, right? But these tenets have held forever in terms of simplicity of business. How can we take them and overlay them in 2026 from a business and from a financial perspective? Can we, like, are there technology tools that you're looking at that are currently out there that you think will be groundbreaking? Are there newer systems or are there newer business models that you see emerging? Like the business model which you pursued in Rackspace was an emerging business model.
Yeah.
You won you did lots of things really, really well at Rackspace, don't get me wrong. But you redefined the way that the service economy for hosting was delivered.
Yeah.
So, are there newer models? Are there newer technologies? Are there newer practices that you're seeing emerging that you think can be groundbreaking?
Yeah, I think I was always puzzled by the fact that most finance and accounting functions are in-house.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
And
controversial, but keep going.
And even when I was at Scaleworks and had conversations with Lou and Ed about this, I always felt like accounting has to be a function that needs to be completely outsourced. And in a way, Rackspace was a little bit like the outsourced IT department kind of a way.
It was, yeah.
And we had these not official taglines, but we're the best employees you never hired type of a thing, right? And but the whole point about it was really that we had the same thing that applies in accounting, which is for most people working deep in the underbelly of an accounting AP, AR function somewhere in a random middle-sized company, it's a job and not a career. And that's fine.
Okay.
Not everybody has to have, everybody has different aspirations and objectives in their professional pursuits. But I think more importantly, what we see is like every company reinvents the billing process, and then the implementation of the system, and then the collection process, and then this, and then the same thing on AP, and then the same thing on closing the books, and this and that and the other. And it's all done by, well-intended, motivated individuals that just come to work every day, right? And I think what's going to happen, maybe the way that I thought about it for a long time, is that accounting and finance will just be outsourced and be done by the Rackspaces of the world, in finance versions of Rackspaces, is that what we clearly see is that the functional elements are just being replaced, right?
Yeah.
You have Ramp that does AP and expense management. You have Centage that does, stuff on whatever. FP&A, exactly. Yeah. You have Chargeify or other companies who do the billing stuff, right? And I think these companies, they start in a niche, as they always do, as they should, and they become full service solutions eventually, I think. I believe, or that's what I think they should become. In the sense that, there's no point in sourceability, for example, to have a collections department. And yet that's what we're spending time with all the time, right? Invoicing and billing and the system of it. And I just want to plug and play. I want to focus on, like everywhere else, right? I want to focus on the core service of what provides value to the customer. And all these other functions have to be owned by professionals and ideally third parties, I think. And so the what that means for the VP or the CFO layer is that it becomes even more so an orchestration layer rather than a functional head with
Yeah.
lots of people in your department and lots of headcount and things like that. And you want to build the tech stack, and you want to administer and maintain the tech stack, and benefit from all those evolutions that are happening out there. I think it's prehistoric, the way that finance and accounting is run in 99% of organizations. Everybody has their little accountant.
I agree. And I think that if we could transplant the time, effort, and management used managing those functions and put that across into driving business outcomes, it's groundbreaking stuff.
Yes, I think so.
Like I take it a further level. Like if you overlay AI on top of that, where you're getting into a position where those processes and functions that you previously operated and then managed, the automatable ones were moved across into AI, you can maybe save 40, 50% overhead in terms of time. Now that's your choice, what you want to be as a company. Do you wish to drive that back and, lower your employee pool so you can drive profitability? Or alternatively, do you want to take that strategic opening and do you want to use that to drive business models, processes, and outcomes?
Yes.
So we always say that. I mean, like, again, I don't want to latently pitch Centage as an FP&A tool, but on a daily basis, we see this struggle with companies that have, Excel sheets that are just unusable, that collapse anytime you make a change. When there are software tools out there, myriads of them. I mean, like that can replace that function and drive huge productivity within the business, which can be put into driving outcomes as opposed to reporting results.
Yeah. I think the onus on these third parties like Centage and Ramp and others are to really provide services or software solution services that are so plug and playable.
Yes.
That the adoption curve has to be acceptable. All the AI invention and AI integration and technology integration, that's another thing, right? I refuse to impose an AI initiative on my organization. But what I want is for us to consume products and services where the onus is on the service provider to make best use of AI and then to consume it that way, right? The idea that my team is going to come up with some ingenious use of Claude and Claude code, and it's just laughable.
I know, I agree.
And I include myself. I'm not pointing out my team. I'm just saying the idea that me is going to AIfy the finance organization is laughable.
And
I don't want that. Those are not mental cycles that I think are worth spending.
I entirely agree. And the one premise I'd say to that is, and I know you are from a technical perspective, you need to be technical enough to understand that the provider that's selling you this AI solution is actually delivering an AI solution. Because we're at a point in time here, like we're at the advent of an emerging technology that's rising.
Yeah.
And at every point in history, at this point in time, you have charlatans entering the frame. You have bad actors that are selling you elixirs for healthy outcomes, which are just water in a bottle. So are there businesses out there doing great stuff around AI? Absolutely. Like the advent of what people are now calling output-based pricing it's here. So you're no longer paying for a software tool or a function. You're paying for that software tool to deliver a specific outcome. Fin.ai charging 99 cents per each ticket that it resolves within your CX stack. Really interesting things like that. But for every one of those, there's going to be 100 out there that are selling you vaporware. I think it's super important for businesses like Sourceability, with you at the head of this organization from a finance and structural perspective, to embrace this AI like you are, but just ensure that the governance is done in terms of the tool you're bringing in, that you're not buying something that's non-existent. And we're seeing a lot of that out there. There are certain questions that you can ask.
Yeah.
Look, I guess like to finish off, this has been really, really wonderful. Can you give us you were really great earlier talking about frame of mind when certain decisions were made. Can you talk to us about like certain specific points in your career where the light bulb turned on, certain bits of advice that you got from mentors that drove you in different directions? Like, I can pinpoint 3 or 4 points of my career where I made certain decisions that I feel had a lasting impact in terms of my career, how it developed, and how successful or unsuccessful it became post those decisions. So help us with that a bit, like in terms of what they were.
Yeah, I think a lot of them I've already mentioned. I think the you know,
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
no,
but I'm putting you on the spot.
I think that there was, I always had the luxury of not being, too held back. I mean, we talked about, the difficulties of moving the family now, or the challenges, or the maybe the lack of desire to do so, which has implications, right? But certainly the moves or the physical moves I made in the past, and the professional moves I made in the past were a little bit unconventional, and were always met with a little bit of like, what are you going to do? So even when I went from New York to San Antonio, I mean, the Bennett Stewart, who I shared the financials with and talked about Rackspace, he's like, well, it's the biggest honor to get hired by a client, so that's good. I wouldn't move to San Antonio, but I get that, and this is a kick-ass company, so go, right? So he was but everybody else in my New York social network was like, you going where? And to San Antonio, not to San Jose, to San Antonio. I mean, those things are, and to me, it was like, of course I'm going to join this company. This is like the most amazing thing I've ever seen, with the most amazing people I've ever met. Of course I'm going. It was not even a question. But again, they didn't know what I saw, and so it wasn't really that much of a difficult decision. But there were always people who either encouraged me or gave me the little push, like the Brian Thompson thing I mentioned, like my professor in Switzerland, where I'm in academic circles, they call this an ABD, which is an all but dissertation. So I did my PhD, all the educational piece, except for the dissertation, right? But he was the first one who said, like, of course you got to go. With this offer in hand, of course you're going to go to the US. You're going to live in New York, working for a reputable firm, doing what you love, getting paid like, a lot of money, which turned out not to be the case, but that's a different story. But of course you're gonna go, and you need that, because you may already be knowing that this is the right move, but of course you're hesitant, you're challenged, you're whatnot. So I think those are really. And there's the famous Steve Jobs thing, right? Which after the fact you can connect the dots and it all makes sense, right? At the time when it happens, it may not. Now, when I think back, I think all of these little moves and big moves and decisions, especially the way that I spin the narrative now, it all makes sense. But at the time, it may not, or it could have gone very differently.
Hindsight is always 20/20.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to look back on these things and then, but when you're taking those decisions real time and you're adopting the risk, as opposed to commenting on the third party person adopting the risk, it's a whole different scenario. I mean, it's one that that I've shared. Yeah. I moved a family of 5, 7, and 8 to San Antonio in 2018. And it's not an easy decision to make, and it's not without its risk. I think one of the things that you've always displayed is a distinct lack of hubris. So I think your ability to take guidance and advice from others is a very strong suit in terms of success. Actually, soundboarding it, your employer saying, "This is a fantastic opportunity. Of course, you take it," and not coming in there with a closed mind. Any particular, like going back to, say, Rackspace, right? Going back to Graham, Pad, Lanham, Lou, and stuff, like any particular point that you saw, like when you realized this was going to be something great, or was that at the very get-go when you met the guys and sat down and saw the mentality and saw the drive?
Well, I think there were a lot of things. I think that So we talked about a lot of things, but incredibly smart, of course. That's just a given, right? And also very ambitious. But I think what they also had, What they also had, they were also incredibly complementary to each other. Complete men with an E. In the sense that, Lou, who we know very well, always knew where the company has to, the Wayne Gretzky thing, right? Where is the company has to be tomorrow to make sure it can take the puck, right? Graham, who's just culturally the culture, bearer, the flag bearer, like just such an amazing person in that. And then Lanham, who's just a machine. And, and I have the highest respect for each of them individually and collectively, but Lanham was an exceptional CEO in the sense that, we were operating like a public company from day one that he walked in. So the lore goes before I joined, even like Project Profit, when the company was supposed to be sold, didn't get sold, and then had to operate on its own because there was no funding available. All the unit economics and all the economic goodness that I observed when I started consulting with them were embedded in that early phase of the company because it had to be. Right. And so they were incredibly complementary to each other in all the aspects that ended up being super relevant. Right. So on the strategy side, how we think about technology and technology services in a constantly evolving world of technology. Culture really, I think, has, cannot be overestimated, the importance of that. And how we build a company where people actually go to work because they want to work there. And then also the daily discipline of going to the salt mine and just take the axe and pick away every day. And he's just like, that was, amongst many other things, he was also an exceptional speaker and a motivator and, whatever. But he was the Duracell bunny,
Yeah.
And you need that too.
I always love that adage, hard work trumps talent when talent doesn't work.
Yeah.
You really 80% of success is just showing up. Okay. The last two questions, okay? One, if you could give your 26-year-old self one bit of advice, what would it be?
Yeah.
And two, if you could give that 26-year-old that's looking to progress their path into, well, maybe 30-year-old, from the VP level into the C level, from a reporting finance function into a strategic finance function. So firstly, what bit of advice would you give yourself? And secondly, what bit of advice would you give that individual?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot because I saw that question beforehand, and that's the one that I don't think I have a ready answer. I mean, I do have an answer, obviously, now. But I think, interestingly, given that I'm, consider myself a finance person, I think I would stress the importance of investing as early as you can. And when I say investing, I mean it in the broadest sense of the word. Both into your career, right? Your most important asset you have is your brain, I guess, or your human being, and whether it's educational, whether it's learning, all of that, just that's number one, right? And then also financially, if I look back and I think about mistakes, again, no regrets, but I was a very conservative investor for a very long period of time. I never really had any money. I mean, I grew up in a middle-class household that had no money, but we also had no debts. So we were kind of in a we had vacations every year. We had everything we needed. We grew up in beautiful Switzerland, but we were not wealthy in any way, shape, or form. But we also didn't miss anything. But building wealth was not even in my consideration set when I was 26. That was not something that that's something you see in TV. That's not something a guy in Switzerland, you just go get a job and do that. But this whole idea, and not necessarily building wealth in a purely monetary sense, but investing heavily into either your business or a curated set of content like you do right now, right? I mean, I wish I would have started. I did write the book. A lot of people tell me, "Oh, you should write the book," and I'm like, "Oh, I already wrote one like 30 years ago." So I don't want to do that again. But writing or starting to create a curated set of whether it's insights or things, whatever it is, really, it doesn't really actually matter whatever it is, what it is, but building towards something that's equity value, so to speak. Making sure that when you do work in a company, that as early as possible you can participate in the equity of the company, right? Which is something that is not usually possible for most employees, but it's also something that's often not sought by the employees, right? And you have to make maybe career choices so that you can participate. I mean, one of the beautiful things about joining Rackspace was the ability to participate in equity that I probably would not have had if I would have stayed in New York and would have become a VP at Goldman Sachs or something.
Well, right? This talks to the culture.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, grain.
The ownership mindset.
Culture and mindset is essential in businesses like that. And that is why you go the extra mile.
Yeah. And that was not clear to me. That was not clear to me at all. And then, even specific financial considerations, like, my asset allocation was wrong with the benefit of hindsight, but also we were sitting in 20 years of bull market, so could have gone differently, right?
Karl,
but I was too conservative.
Karl, if you were able to predict 2008 and you didn't write a book, that would be an injustice.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the finance side, on the finance VP side, I think we mentioned that now several times. I think you need a variety. You need professional exposure. Broad professional exposure to be an effective CFO. You can obviously you can always get the job somehow. I also, like, one of the things I always tell people that ask me about this is, like, your aim should not be to land a job. Your aim should be to be a strong contender and to be considered. That's what you need to aim for.
Right. Yeah.
And you need to get into the consideration set. If you get the job or not, there's so many things that you have not only now control over, but there's so many other things. Like I always say, like, if Rackspace would have been in San Jose instead of San Antonio, I would not have become CFO because we would have hired a hotshot, right? And so that last piece of you actually getting the job is so circumstantial that it's not the thing to aim for. The only thing you can aim for is for you to become a valuable candidate. And for that, you have to have broad exposure and you have to bridge. I never closed the books. I still don't know, but I don't want to say I'm an expert, but I'm pretty good at financial statement analysis. I know how accounting standards work. I studied them. I have a CFA. I'm, for all intents and purposes, I'm an expert in that area. And I know probably more about accounting than most of our accountants, even though I don't know what they do when they close the books, right? But there's, like, you still have to have a very deep understanding and appreciation for that. And so if you just grow up in the finance role and you're overly focused about your cost structure and your margins and your, growth rates, and you don't really know what you're building holistically, then you may get the job, but you may not be super effective in it.
That's really, again, simplicity. It's a really, really good answer. Okay, Karl, thank you so much. I think we'll call it there. Yeah. This has been the CFO Review. I've been Paul Lynch. This has been Karl Pichler. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey everyone, we got a real treat for you next week. I have a CFO coming on. He started his career being entrepreneurial, building roofing companies, then moved back into the corporate world. A great history of CPG goods, culminating in leading FP&A for an $8 billion global line of products. Then moved into mission-based businesses where he learned Spanish so he could conduct board meetings in Mexico with his crew. And then ultimately ended these missions by working in carbon sequestering in an incredibly interesting area of business that is now thriving.